Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the School Leadership Show. I have with me, as always, Jen David Lang, co-host extraordinaire. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Fabulous. And I am super excited to talk about this book, the one that you have summarized most recently here, The Influential School Leader, Inspiring Teachers, Students, and Families Through Social and Organizational Psychology by Craig Murphy and John Dioria. So the authors basically are looking at school leadership and practices that an effective school leader might use through this lens of social and organizational psychology. So talk about why you picked this book. I think it's absolutely fascinating.
Well, this book aims to help leaders both with initiating change at their schools, but also with addressing and dealing with change that comes their way. And clearly, it is April 2021, and we have just experienced a year of change like none ever before. And so it's perfect timing to be thinking about it. And also, I really appreciate how they wove in um, social psychology and organizational psychology with the idea that leaders are least effective when they rule, by caveat, this is me and my position and this is what I say. Instead, leaders are more effective when they can influence staff and teachers and families and bring them along so that they too embrace the change. So I thought that was particularly important for now.
So we talked about, before we started recording, about how we might approach this, because the authors do a nice job of integrating, like Jen said, these two pieces of psychology with school leadership, and they do so in this framework that has three different areas, and we're going to. So our thought was to kind of go over that framework quickly, and then go back to and then after we've done sort of the broad overview, then go back and use the framework as a way of thinking about reopening school in fall of 2021 with the premise that it would be going back to complete full-time in-person learning.
Yes.
How's that sound?
Sounds good to me. Yes.
All right. Well, let's giddy up. So the framework, let's talk about the framework. So the first one is about four different perspectives. So people know the three parts of the framework. There's four perspectives, three dimensions, and four conditions for change. Jen, you are like me. You like numbered lists of things.
Former math teachers, right?
all day long. So talk about the four perspectives.
Sure, but before we do that, I just want to step back for 1 second. And basically, what they're saying is that the kinds of changes that we're dealing with right now are complex changes. And before we jump into solutions as leaders, you need to step back and you need to make sure that you fully understand the problem and that you have a strong foundation to address the problem. So this framework is not even stepping into, okay, this is what you need to do to fix all your problems or address all your problems. So first, they're saying the first thing leaders need to do is make sure they have a really good understanding of what the challenge or the problem is. And one way to do that is by thinking of the four perspectives. That is, understanding the problem from the point of view of four levels. So the first level is the district or superintendent's level. What is their perspective on the problem? Then there's the school leader's perspective of the problem. Then the teachers or the staff members' perspectives, and finally the students and family members' perspective. So, too often as leaders, we act with spatial blindness, right? We assume everyone has the same information and the same experiences that we do, which, of course, Mike, you and I know is not the case. And so leaders really need to pull out these four perspectives from other stakeholder groups to make sure they fully understand the problem. Otherwise, all they've got is their own perspective of the problem. And, they talk about some aspects of social psychology that get in the way of our understanding what the problem is. For example, many people have heard of confirmation bias. Just the idea is that we tend to listen to the information that confirms what we already believe, and we ignore all the other information that contradicts what we believe, right? So, if teachers believe that they have the most important work because they are working directly with students and they're used to the administration not keeping their needs at the forefront. Then if the administration, if the principal does do something that puts teachers' needs first, they almost ignore that because it goes against what their beliefs are. So the important part of the 4 perspectives is taking time before you address any problem to step back and ask other stakeholders, interview, talk to other stakeholders, have anonymous surveys to find out what other perspectives are of this problem.
And I think that's really important. And the other thing to mention too is that idea of schema, or putting things into previously formed mental categories that we already have, and that can be a trap for folks too, thinking that if this problem is somehow similar to something that we had before, so the solution must be exactly the same. But not always the case, especially in the uncharted waters that we're in now.
Yeah. I mean, we have schema about different groups, all, students are this way, families are that way, and it sets up a real us and them mentality, which just isn't going to serve us in addressing these very complex problems.
Excellent. So that's the 4 perspectives. What about what's next? Seeing the system in 3D, the authors say, or is that your language?
No, that's theirs. That's their language. Good question. So the first part is looking at the problem from the perspectives of the stakeholders. The second part is looking at the problem itself. And you can look at a problem from 3 levels: from the surface level dimension, the below the surface dimension, and the system dimension. So the surface level dimension are the behaviors and the actions. So let's say in your school, all the white kids and the students of color are sitting separately in the cafeteria. So at the surface level, you are observing this problem. Oh, look at the behaviors and the actions. And you can say, from here on in, we're going to assign seats so that, people all sit with people from different backgrounds. And that's sort of a surface level understanding of the problem. And it does send a message that you think this is unacceptable, but it doesn't get at the heart of the issue. So then the next level is the below the surface dimension. What are the feelings and the attitudes that are causing the problem, right? So you might go out and interview students and ask them, and they might say, well, I just feel more comfortable sitting with people who look like me, who come from my neighborhood. This is just how I feel. I don't have the opportunity to interact with other students in classes. So that's getting at the feelings. They don't feel comfortable sitting with one another. So now you're getting
really getting it and getting at the why of it.
Exactly.
So, why is this why am I observing this behavior, in other words?
Exactly. So before it was the what are we observing? Oh, students are sitting separately. The why, oh, they don't feel comfortable. And then an even deeper level is what's called the system dimension. So what are the beliefs and values, whether explicit or implicit, of the whole system? So it may be that in this case, the system is the district, right? So maybe in the district, in an attempt to create different levels of classes, they are unintentionally racially segregating classes, and so students don't really have an opportunity to interact with each other throughout the day. So that's saying something about the larger beliefs of the system, right? Do we believe in setting up classes like this that are segregated? So that's getting at the larger system as a way to understand the problem. What's the surface level problem, the below the surface, and the larger system?
Right. Like what conditions have we set up, either on purpose or accidentally, that lead to these types of feelings, which result in these types of behaviors.
Right, because all problems exist within a context,
Right.
and certainly here, when we're talking about problems in schools, schools exist within districts. I mean, of course, they also exist in the community and the city, or the larger community, but more immediately they exist within the district.
So we've had the four perspectives: superintendent, principal, teachers and staff, students and family. The three dimensions: surface level, or behaviors and actions; below the surface, feelings and emotions; and system, or values and beliefs. Talk about the four conditions for change.
So again, we're still not jumping into solving any kind of problems, but we're getting a better understanding of what's going on. And now the authors argue that we need to have four conditions in place in order for us to address complex change. And so the first condition is psychological safety. And psychological safety is basically when your staff feel comfortable expressing themselves, being themselves, when they feel comfortable sharing concerns and mistakes without fear of any kind of retribution. But the authors are careful to point out that psychological safety doesn't mean that teachers and staff can just do whatever they want to do. That you have to balance psychological safety with accountability for the mistakes, for the failures, so that everyone can learn and you can move to the next step. And so sometimes we think psychological safety is, everyone has to agree all the time and feel good all the time. And that's not necessarily the case. For example, another concept that psychologists call cognitive dissonance, when an individual experiences discomfort from holding two inconsistent beliefs at the same time. So we don't want to create a place where there's no cognitive dissonance. We want teachers, staff members, leaders to have certain set of beliefs, but also be comfortable with new beliefs and new ideas and change. And you can't be if you're just always going to cling to your comfort and your own beliefs. You need to be comfortable with feedback loops. When teachers are giving feedback to leaders about their leadership, and leaders are giving feedback to teachers about their teaching and learning. And so the idea is not to create this happy place where everybody just feels safe, but really they talk about creating a brave space more than anything. But it's within this context of having a psychologically safe culture that you're able to see real change come to schools.
Right, where people feel comfortable taking risks, being honest and authentic, and like you said, accepting the discomfort of difficult conversations, which can be challenging.
Yeah, because that's really the only way to grow, right? Is when you do make mistakes and you learn from them, and when you do share feedback with each other, and when there are disagreements. If you think about it, that's where the real learning does occur. So it takes a while. It's not an easy thing to do for leaders to create this kind of space where there is psychological safety, but with accountability for change and learning and making mistakes.
So psychological safety is the first condition for change. What's the second of the four?
The second one is creating a culture where there's a sense of belonging, right? I mean, you have to feel like you belong if you're going to change and try new things. So, a sense of belonging is when you feel like, yes, I'm valued here. Yes, my voice counts. Yes, I have a future with these people. And the sense of belonging is incredible because it increases your staff retention. It increases the likelihood that your staff, they're going to go out and they're going to find other like-minded people to come work at your school. So it's very important for the leader to assess what is the sense of belonging here at the school. And there are some questions in the book that leaders can ask themselves, simple questions. What's the daily attendance of staff, right? What's the retention rate? What stories do staff tell about our work culture? Do we hear from all voices at staff meetings? So the idea is, again, to create this sense of belonging, but not to create conformity. There is this classic article that I think the authors reference called When Nice Won't Suffice by Elisa McDonald. It's a really great read for a staff meeting. And it's just the idea that the goal is not just for everyone to sit around in a circle and just nod their heads, yes, yes, yes. And in fact, that's harmful because people won't speak up then and really share open and honest information. So we need to get beyond this culture of nice, so that teachers and staff members can question each other and really open themselves up to change. And one of the suggestions the authors provide is that in meetings, we tend to focus on very technical norms, right? Technical norms of a meeting are like, we are going to start and end on time. We are always going to have an agenda. Those are technical norms. But they talk about using adaptive norms, and I had never heard this expression before, but it's more about how staff members are going to engage with each other and how they're going to deal with conflict, which inevitably there is in schools. So an example of
I think that concept of adaptive norms is pretty interesting. I think this is where you were headed, but they gave some examples. Do you want to share those examples?
Yeah. So an example of an adaptive norm is like, we are willing to engage in conflict and stay engaged to resolve issues. We will lean into discomfort. We will take responsibility for identifying what is troubling us and share it with the appropriate person. We will listen for the quiet voice and reach out to those more reluctant to speak in groups. And I think when I heard these types of adaptive norms in the past, I kind of poo-pooed them because you can't really measure that in the same way that you can measure a meeting starting and ending on time. But, a very simple way that you can hold the group accountable to these kinds of norms is just right after a meeting. You could just share, one of the norms and say, how did we do today on leaning into discomfort, right? Everybody answer from 1 to 10. You personally, did you lean into discomfort? You personally, did you try to listen for the quiet voice and draw that person out? And just a very quick self-assessment of how you did will help to make these norms come alive. But again,
I really like that idea. Yeah. I mean, what a great use of technology too. A quick anonymous poll at the end of the meeting, maybe like you said, talk about one of them, and then have that data for the beginning of the next meeting to say, hey, remember, these are our norms. Here's how we rated ourselves last time. We were we were sort of low on listening for the quiet voice. So, let's pay special attention to that today. Yeah. Or even just putting the data up there and saying, okay, what do you, any thoughts on this? What do you notice about it? And then use that as the, sort of a jumping off point for the next meeting. I really like that idea. And I think, feelings are data. So it works.
No, it does. But and I like that idea of using just a simple, like a Zoom poll where it doesn't say who ranked which number. It's completely anonymous. So that's a great idea, Mike.
So so our conditions for change. The first one is safety. The second is belonging, and the third is communication. So what do they have to say about communication?
Yeah. So obviously for change to happen, you need open and honest communication. Otherwise, you're making decisions and plans without all the information. So, you would think that a chapter about communication would be about, getting newsletters out but it's very different. This chapter says that some of the ways to ensure that you've got open and honest communication, first of all, is to minimize those topics that are non-discussable, that are taboo. So topics like our own leadership styles, right? The inconsistent treatment of teachers and staff, or conflicts with teacher unions, certainly issues related to race. These are topics that are traditionally considered taboo, but if the leader can step up and be willing to not only allow these topics, but actually seek out people who will talk about these topics or put them on a meeting agenda, that's one way to strengthen open and honest communication. The other thing we don't talk a lot about in school is, the power differentials. So when you feel like someone in a higher position says something and you don't feel like you can contradict it, you shut up, right? So what if a new teacher has a concern about the curriculum? We want that new teacher to be able to go to the department chair, even though the department chair, is higher up on the hierarchy. So it's important for leaders to address these types of power imbalances, or they're not going to get all the information. And
Well,
sorry, yeah, go.
and then walk the walk with that. If
Yeah.
somebody does bring something forward, act on it, or at least as a leader, acknowledge what it is.
Yeah, and then certainly model it yourself, right? So you as the,
Right.
the pinnacle of the school, if somebody has a criticism or a comment or feedback, you really should model graciously accepting that feedback or using that feedback in some way. But yeah.
And that's something too. I mean, and that's definitely something that people need to practice and work on. A lot of times it's a good way to, if you're starting a new position, and the last few that I've started, probably the last 3 or 4, one thing I would say as I was meeting with people would be, hey, I'm new here. So you've been here for a while. If you think I'm not going in the right direction, or you see me, walking into a buzzsaw, could you let me know so I don't do that? Like, I want to do a good job. I don't. So I think that kind of vulnerability, it can feel uncomfortable as a leader, particularly if you're a brand new leader. It's your first gig or whatever. I think back to my first principalship, and I was like 25, and I thought I had to know all the answers, and then I think back to, the most recent position I've started, and by going in with that vulnerability and that, hey, we're in this together, help me, help you kind of thing, it works. I've been pulled away from the buzzsaw a couple of times.
No, and also more importantly, and then it trickles down when the leader has that type of approach to feedback and correction, then other people feel that as well. So that does help with the power differentials throughout the building, not just with you as the leader. Yeah, no, and another way to help with this open and honest communication is to improve school meetings. Typically, right, we create agendas by ourselves without any input. So, consider developing the agenda with other people. Consider using protocols that make sure that people all get an opportunity to speak. Think about the feelings of the meeting, not just the content. Do participants feel valued and heard at this meeting? And so, the authors provide some assumptions that help to foster more open communication. And leaders can look at these assumptions and see, do they hold the types of assumptions that foster open communication, or do they hold the types of assumptions that discourage open communication? So, for example, one assumption that may seem very basic, but it's simply, we all have information to share. So remember from the beginning with the 4 perspectives and the spatial blindness, is we do often act like, oh, everybody has the information I have, right? So why aren't they making the same decisions that I am? No, we have to say, no, we all have different information to share. And that's an assumption we start with, people can disagree with us and still have pure motives. We've got to stop with the us against them feelings. If someone's not agreeing with me, then they're wrong, Or a really big one is that
can we go back to that one? That
one
is huge with, assuming positive intent from people, or assuming that they have pure motives, because that you almost have to do that, or you start to take things personally and then things go nowhere. So that's probably the best way to not take things personally. Like, this person is not doing this as a, because they have a grudge against me. They're doing it because they're coming from a pure place. So I think that's a big one. I'm glad they put that in there.
Yeah, no, I like that, because you often hear, separate the person from the problem. But how do you do that? And right here, you just connected the dots, Mike, right? Well, the way you do that is by having assume the best of the person. That's how you connect the dots. But yeah, there's a lot of great assumptions that will help to foster open communication. I mean, here's one that I don't know if I'm so good at, but we may be contributing to the problem ourselves. right? So let's say whatever problem is on the table, what if everybody around the table thought to themselves, in what way might I be contributing to the problem? I don't know that people always think like that.
They definitely don't. And I like how they take it to the next level of, by staying silent is one piece of contributing to it, but it also might be, voicing your opinions about the problem to people who aren't involved in helping to solve it. So, admiring the problem with your colleagues and complaining about it doesn't necessarily contribute to actually solving it. So I thought that's pretty insightful, I think, from their perspective.
Yeah, no, they bring a lot of great new approaches to addressing problems here. And another thing they suggest that you do to foster open communication is to avoid groupthink. That's another term from psychology. And basically, there have been tests that show even if you know something is false, you're more likely to agree with what others say just to fit in. Right? So even if I know that today is April 5th, if the 4 people who speak before me say, oh, it's April 6th, I'm really less likely to speak up and instead say, the wrong thing. And so, they give some simple suggestions to avoid groupthink in a meeting, right? So one way might be to ask everybody individually and privately to brainstorm solutions before sharing. So that way you're not influenced by what other people think. Or maybe share suggestions anonymously. Then you don't know who is sharing what. Or you might invite in individuals who have a very unique perspective to share, who might be in the minority. And you say, here, this person has something worthwhile to share. I'm going to ask this person to share her perspective. So those are some ways to avoid groupthink and to get it more open and honest information.
I like that. And having people, tell their own truth in their own voice, I think is really important. Another thing to think about too, and it's good instruction, right? Like have people write down at the beginning of the meeting, whatever it is that you're talking about. And then when you go to, when you're trying to hear those, sometimes quieter voices, it's not just you ask the question, sit there and wait. You can say, oh, Jen, we haven't heard from Jen yet. Jen, what did you write down on your paper today? So I think that's the way to do it. The other thing too is also to be aware of, we talked about the power differentials and things like that. Like being aware that, if you're the leader, you don't, at least my approach is I try not to be the first one to talk because I don't want people in the room feeling like they have to agree with me because I'm the boss. I've seen that work really well. They give a special ed example here, which is I have a similar one, but like at a team meeting about a student, if an assistant principal is running the meeting, you don't start with the assistant principal talking. You start with the people who are closest to the student. So maybe it's the one-on-one paraprofessional, then maybe it's the OT, the PT, speech, and then the classroom teacher. So you kind of, and then if there's anything left to say, then the administrator can say it at the end. But you want to hear from the people who are, closest to what's going on. So I like their approach there.
Yeah, it's a great way to combine the dealing with the power differentials and the groupthink at the same time. Yeah. So the final condition, just to say quickly, is so the final condition for change is that you need a culture where experimentation is encouraged. So, basically, if you're trying to create change or deal with change, no one is going to get everything right 100% of the time. So you need to create a culture where your staff members feel like they're quote unquote scientists of learning, right? That they're trying something out, they're looking at the results, they're tweaking it, they're trying it again, they're assessing the impact, and they're trying something else. So, rather than jumping to solutions, really having a culture where people are, they're scientists, they're learning from failures, they're experimenting, they're testing things out, and there's no expectation of 100% perfection all the time, which we know doesn't happen in schools anyway, right? I mean, how often do you teach a lesson and 100% of the students get 100% of what you're trying to teach them? They don't.
They don't. And even thinking about what we know about what works in other places, that's the whole idea behind lesson study. That's, and I think you pointed out in here about, from Hattie's work around teachers assessing their own impact. And I think that's big. That's a big deal. And they talk about solutionitis. I thought that was pretty funny. What did they mean by that?
I think that all of us jump to the solution, right? I mean, that's often why people find themselves as leaders, is they've got lots of great ideas, but they suffer from solutionitis, which is jumping to the solution without doing all the things that you and I are talking about from the book right now, without considering a problem from four perspectives, without considering the 3 dimensions of the problem, and without really creating the conditions for change at your school or district. It's only after you've done all of those things that you should be moving towards solution. But we jump there too quickly.
We do. And I can't remember where I heard it or who said it long, long ago, in reference to this concept of solutionitis, but more around saying that, it's a solution in search of a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That, right. Here's my solution. Let's go find a problem, which is then that ties back into confirmation bias too. So, well, we absolutely did not do what we said we were going to do.
No, we didn't, did we?
but I liked it this way. I think this was a good conversation, and maybe it wasn't completely in the context of full-time reopening, but I think we got the point across. I'm feeling good about it. What do you think?
Yeah,
Jen?
we won't go through this for reopening, but I think that this is a powerful tool as schools are thinking about reopening. To before you jump into, this is what we're going to do, in the fall, solutionitis. Stop and see, what have been the problems in your building, in your school. From the superintendent's perspective to the students and family, because the problems are very different. And if you're trying to solve a problem just from one perspective, it's going to be very hard without the other 3 perspectives.
And I think too, to consider as part of this, this idea sometimes it comes out where you will hear teachers say, well, they just need to tell us what to do. They should just tell us, or the principal. Well, we just need district office to tell us what to do and then we'll do it. I think people say that, but I don't think they really mean it. People want generally a voice in decision making, and they are much more likely to support a decision that they have participated in the making of, and or at least understand the process that was used to arrive at the decision.
Absolutely. And, there's a case study in the book about, returning to, I think it's high school after COVID-19. And they really spent some time meeting with people, doing anonymous surveys, just to really dig into what we're talking about. What is the problem? And they ended up just realizing that if they wanted to provide a supportive and engaging reopening for students, that they first had to do that for the teachers. And that is not something they would have come to by just quickly jumping to the solution. And so, take some guidance from this framework. There's also a chapter in the book which has 9 steps that you can follow to lead to the kinds of improvements that you want. This is an incredible opportunity to remake schools or certain aspects of schools and not just return to what we had in schools before, but it needs to be done well. And you need to do a full exploration of what are the problems you're trying to solve, what are the different perspectives, and then how can we go about creating conditions, because you really can spend the last few months of school building up those 4 conditions so that you can bring about more change in the fall. So the next few months of school and summer can be about how do you build psychological safety, a sense of belonging, open and honest communication, and a culture of experimentation.
Yeah, and I think your point is well taken. I think this is not an opportunity to just go back to the way things have always been. There was a great article in The Atlantic a couple months ago, and the title was something like "School wasn't that great before COVID either." Yeah. So, so I think this really is an opportunity for people to to hopefully, improve at a systems level what students are experiencing. So, Jen, thanks so much. What a great conversation, as always. And if folks want a copy of the summary, they can email you. I'll put correct. That's the offer still on the table.
Yeah, and I have a one-page overview of this framework that you and I were talking about today. So so if they want to have that one pager, that's something they could look at as they're planning the months in front of them.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. And any sneak preview on the next book that we're going to be talking about?
I'm not sure what it is yet, so it'll be a surprise.
Okay. It'll be a surprise. All right. Thanks, Jen.
All right. Good. Take care, Mike. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.